Hello and welcome to another great edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior Vice President and Executive Editor at Black Enterprise. And y'all, if you've been watching Beyond the Hype for the past year, you already know how geeked up I am about having this conversation, because this past year I went from being what I call a NASCAR adjacent fan. Like I liked a lot of things about NASCAR, but I didn't really get into NASCAR. And thanks to this gentleman that we have on the show here and a whole bunch of other of his colleagues over the past year, I was at my first NASCAR race in Las Vegas last year. I was at the first Chicago Street Race, which you're going to talk about today. I've been to Daytona. I was all NASCAR last year.
I love it. You have been on the circuit, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And my guest today is Brandon Thompson. He is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, one of the major forces behind the drive for diversity at NASCAR. Now, NASCAR, the first thing you learn is that it's really a team sport. I know we focus on the drivers, but it ranges from everybody from pit crew to executives. This is not, and it's a family business, but it's a true team sport despite the focus on the individual athletes. So I know, Brandon, you would not take credit for everything that's happened over the last 20 years. But I got to say, you started out as an intern at Nashville Super Speedway. The Drive for Diversity started out 20 years ago. And now you look at everything that I learned about, from executives to pit crew training and drivers like Rajah, Caruth, and obviously Bubba Wallace and others. And you got to say, NASCAR has done as great a job of transforming the sport while staying true to the roots of the sport as I've seen any institution do. So listen, with that, let me welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me, Alfred. I'm really excited about this conversation. Man, what can I say? Black Enterprise has meant so much to the culture over the years. And so it's certainly a pleasure for me to be featured here on the show. It's sort of a full circle moment. And I can remember sitting and looking at Black Enterprise and thumbing through the magazines and reading and trying to pick up on little tidbits along the way. So super excited to be joining you today. And it really is a cool moment. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it's a full circle moment in so many ways, as I've said to many of your colleagues over the past year, because I dropped two names. Max Siegel, who was obviously a big part of the push for diversity over the years in NASCAR, who is a friend of Black Enterprise and obviously big in track and field as well. And the other person I'm going to name is someone that used to be one of my staff members, named Janelle Hazelwood, who was one of my editors, still considers me a mentor to her. And I remember she was get me every year. She's like, "Oh, there's this drive for diversity, and you got to send me." And I'd be like, "Yeah, but it's NASCAR, whatever." And she's like, "No, you don't understand. Stuff is happening here. This is way before all, And she would, make me send her to, whatever you guys were doing with Drive for Diversity every year. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't until last year, and I saw her, I was like, "Now you told me so." And so talk about your journey. I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound like it was easier than it was. I know, first of all, the focus is on just the drivers, but somewhere along the line, you figured out to diversify. You got into pit crews, and we know about Brianna Daniels and the full gamut, because obviously the development of drivers and bringing them into the program is a long-term game. You're not going to get 10, Bubba Wallaces in 10 years. But so just talk about your evolution into the sport coming out of college, and then what NASCAR has been able to do.
Yeah, so I think to talk about my evolution, Alfred, we got to talk about the fact that I didn't know anything about it to begin. So my earliest memories of NASCAR probably consist of, somewhere between 4 and, I don't know, I'd say 8, maybe 10 years old. I do specifically remember begging my grandmother to buy a Richard Petty car from a big box store called Fred's back in the day. I do remember that, and I remember, a couple times kind of hearing about specifically drivers like Bobby Hamilton Jr. On my local sportscast. So I grew up and was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and so because he was from nearby Mount Juliet, and we had another driver from Columbia, Sterling Marlin, we'd hear about sort of some of the races just based on, them recapping their success. And both of them, were able to experience some success, but that was it. So when I showed up To the track my first time. I didn't know anything about it. A lot of my colleagues, at the time would tell you about the time I waited in the rain on the race to start, because I didn't even know that we didn't race in the rain. I was told to be somewhere at a certain time and to carry out a task. And I think it was just assumed that I would, that I would pick up on the fact that if it was raining, I wouldn't need to be there. I did not. I stood out there, got soaking wet, called in on the radio, and they're like, "Yep, nope, they won't be meeting you there because there's no race happening." So
Brandon, coming out of the rain, Brandon.
exactly, it's okay. So yeah, that's where it started, and for it to be here now, I think, as the vice president of diversity and inclusion, we talked about full circle. There's been, I would say, a few probably full circle moments for me over the course of my career, which is pretty cool. I count myself very fortunate for that. But it really started as just, probably a little bit of stubbornness and rebellion. You hear a lot of things about, sports leagues kind of coming up. I was a business administration and marketing major at Clark Atlanta University. And so obviously being a sports fan and having played and participated in sports over the years, I interested in sports, sure, but I never really thought about working in sports, to be honest, until I saw the internship program that NASCAR had that started really back in 2001. So I'm going to date myself a bit here, but I was a part of classes 2 and 3 of that program, and so it just kind of went and carried from there. I fell in love with it again, kind of being places where I wasn't supposed to be. I'll never forget the time I was standing on pit road when the engines fired up and all the hairs on my arms and neck stood up, and I'm like, I've never experienced anything like this. To be honest with you, since I sacked a quarterback playing high school football, but I was like, I need more of this. So, and I've been here ever since. It's certainly been a journey. And there's been, obviously, as with anything, ups and downs, but I wouldn't trade it for the world, and really excited about the opportunity that we have here in NASCAR, along with my colleagues, all of them. But you've mentioned some of the ones, Eric Ryan and John Ferguson, Latasha Causey out of Phoenix, and the list sort of goes on and on. That's just sort of with NASCAR proper. But we've developed, I feel like, a great team who are really savvy, frankly, and up on the culture and what's going on. And so being able to mix that with an executive team who's really open and understands both the head and heart of D&I work, it's been really fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the next 20 years is going to hold.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting and talking several times actually last year with your president, Steve Phelps, about both the sport of NASCAR from the fans' perspective as well as the business, and how this journey that the sport in general is on beyond DEI, driven to some degree by DEI, is really about expanding the appeal of the sport not only nationally, internationally, and connecting those dots is very important. But you talk about the fan experience, and I want to definitely jump into the upcoming Chicago Street Race that's going to happen in Chicago the weekend after 4th of July. And so you talk about, this is what captured me, because like I said, as a black man from New Jersey, or black boy from New Jersey at the time, I realized that I was always in some ways a NASCAR fan without knowing it. Because think about everything you love about NASCAR. Fast cars, fly-looking cars, tracks going as fast as you want without any limits. Even my father, lived in Arizona, so he was all into the country and western stuff. So even the cowboy gear, and you realize that the black cowboy, like everything about NASCAR is like, why wouldn't I love it? And obviously we know about it started out as a southern regional sport that created some cultural barriers around what it meant and what it didn't mean for black people. That had the sport actually had to evolve beyond that culturally. Like you said, it wasn't easy, and there was fits and starts. But you talked about what captured me. So I told you my first race, I went to see the race. Bubba was in it. I think he placed 5th in Las Vegas last year around the spring, and that was my first time physically at a NASCAR race in the audience. And ironically, I had interviewed Bubba at a Black Enterprise event in Nashville only a month earlier, but did not know I was going to end up at that race. So nobody knew I was there. But man, my first Chicago street race, when I wasn't just sitting in the stands, but you got, Eric and many of your colleagues took me down on the track. And you talk about how the fan accessibility is unlike any other sport, where as long as the track is safe, you can go more or less anywhere you want. You get to hang out with the drivers. You're at there, you know what I'm saying? that you don't get to hang out in the New York Giants locker room when they're getting ready to play. You're lucky if you get anywhere near the field without security tackling you. And so you saw what the hair standing up. It was like the fans are in it. Like other than getting in the car.
Yeah. Literally
That's
just
what
short.
got me.
Yeah.
That's what really got me. I was like, when Eric was like, "No, you can go talk to the pit crew." There's no place you really can't go as a fan unless they tell you it's not safe to go there.
Yeah.
And I had that experience at the Chicago Street Race, which was just amazing. With the idea that it's in Chicago, talk about again this upcoming Chicago Street Race and what it means not only as a sporting event in Chicago, but nobody thought of a city like Chicago as a NASCAR city. We're thinking Daytona and Nashville and Talladega, but this is a major step in the expansion of NASCAR's fan base and the cities and the states that it could expand to be a truly national sport. When for such a long time it was just seen as a southern regional sport with national appeal.
Certainly. Yeah, I think Chicago, in a word, that event is number one, I would say, and like huge shout out to Ben Kennedy, Steve O'Donnell, obviously Steve Phelps for kind of being at the tip of the spear on driving this. But the cool part, I say that, and much credit is due there because literally it marks sort of a new day, right? And in evolution, not a new day in the sense that we're not anything that we used to be, but what more can we be moving forward, right? And I think literally everything about Chicago gives us the opportunity to really look at what it's going to be like 15 years into the future, right? 5 years into the future. So understanding the demographics of the city with, the amount of representation from Black and Hispanic Latino consumers, understanding everything Chicago is in terms of an international travel destination, understanding everything Chicago is just from a really great historic American city, right? It really gives us an opportunity to not go in an oval, which people are used to us doing, not race to race literally in the streets, which we've not done, certainly with the Cup Series or any of the national series. Really, you'd have to go to Canada or Europe or someplace, one of the series that we that we license out or co-own there in order to be able to see that. And so it's competition, it's demographics, it's possibility, right? Just it's hey, we can take this sport and pack it up and put it in the LA Coliseum, or we can pack it up and take it to Chicago and run on a street race. And we can do that while being active and involved in the community through our STEM and STEAM work that we have through the Chicago public school system. We can do that by showing up on the west side of Chicago at DuSable, African American Museum, to have Bubba's Block Party. We can do that, by showing up at Columbus Park, right on the south side with where the Tate brothers grew up, and we can do that by showing up like we did just earlier this week with Danny's Amigos at Harrison Park, right? And so I think being able to specifically tap into these neighborhoods, these markets, these consumer bases, and do it differently. I think one of the things that really gets me excited about the things we're doing in Chicago is you can literally hear and feel the people talking about how different and unique it is for an event to be able to come in and tap into the actual west side or tap into the actual south side. And being based here in Charlotte, and we're planning all of these things, right? And you're hearing about how these things are going, but it's not really until we got up there and you sat at that community center, you sat at DuSable, you sit at Harrison Park, and you really start to understand we have really done what NASCAR's been about since 1948, which is bringing the sport to the people. And that's really what it's about. And I think the coolest thing about this is that we're able to do that now, run the same playbook with obviously with some edits to a much broader audience. And so, yes, a core part of that audience is Black and brown and women, and the list sort of goes on from there. But the better part I think about that, and probably the more the part that excites me the most, is that this is it for everybody, right? This is a way to tap into Chicago at large. You're going to get the demographic representation organically because you're in Chicago. But what does it mean for the sport, whether you're Black, brown, gay, straight, tall, short, or whatever it is? if you like racing or you're NASCAR curious, Chicago is a great place to check it out and come see what NASCAR is all about and where it's going in the future.
See, I'm biased, so my audience already knows. While I was born and raised, on the Jersey Shore and lived in Brooklyn, so I'm a New York, New Jersey guy. But Chicago has been my favorite city for 35 years. Like
There
that.
it is.
My thing is, you couldn't have picked a better place because you take everything you just laid out about what makes NASCAR NASCAR, and then you take Chicago's food and Chicago's culture and Chicago's music.
Yep.
And I remember last year's street race, I'm sitting in and watching the race, and then you're realizing you got the Chicago sky, like everything's still happening in Chicago. Chicago shut down. So it's so cool to see the cars kind of disappear around the curve, and beyond that curve, you see, the skyline and everything. It's hard to describe.
Can I interject one more very specific thing about what you're mentioning? So yes, the skyline. The start-finish line ran across Ida B. Wells Boulevard. I mean, I don't know. Like, for me, again, sitting and looking at that, I'm like, man, you know what I mean? Like, what? How symbolic is that, right? And how cool is that to be able to think everything that people, the perception. So, to be fair, some certainly earned over the years, but to be fair, some not. To be able to have that, and while something small like that, I do think is really an indication and sort of symbolic of, again, like where NASCAR is going in the future.
Well, I've been kind of covering, quote, the business of sports since I first came to Black Enterprise. 37 plus years ago, I did a cover story back then it was called "What It Takes to Buy a Team" because I didn't understand all that it took to own a major sports team. And over the years, I've been covering and studying different things. And one of the things I've always told people is that a sport is really ready to blow up. And I don't mean just blow up in terms of fan popularity, but access to whether it's bigger television revenues, more sponsorship ad dollars, when the fan base grows and grows and grows. And I already know just from my own research that you're able to tap into sponsorship of NASCAR activations that were just not really a reality 20 years ago.
Sure.
There were just certain brands that's like, no, that's not really what we're about. Absolutely. And now they're looking, and this is the same thing as basketball becoming an international sport and football becoming an international sport. And obviously we know about Jackie Robinson, the integration of baseball. But I say beyond the social and obviously important social dynamics of diversity in a given sport is the broader fact that the broader fan appeal, the more major a sport becomes. The difference between a major sport and a minor sport is the diversity of its fans. And Absolutely. That's what I noticed big time, not just in Chicago, obviously, because you expect to see Black fans in Chicago. But as I said, I got to experience NASCAR in different venues, and it just felt like an American sport. And I should call out the fact that an Australian driver won the top level street race last year. So it's
one that largely we had never heard of before, really, right? Yeah. And again, I think that just speaks to, again, so many different ways, like you said, that we could go with this. But even as we talk about the competition, I mean, it's the next gen car on a new track with a new driver from a whole other country that ended up winning a race. And just the additional excitement, Shane's been able to win a couple of other races in the Xfinity Series this year. So certainly he's proven, that by and large, it wasn't a fluke. But I mean, as you think about the headlines sort of coming out of last year and going into this year, it's really amazing and setting ourselves up for good weather. We're going to claim that for sure before an even bigger weekend than we had last year.
Yeah, and I should be noted because I was at the press conference. I can't remember the gentleman's name who won, but I was at the press conference for him. But I also got to hear from other drivers who were excited about how the way because he had to adapt to the sport because the way he raced where he was from was different. But they also said, but we learned some things from watching how he handled it that's going to create a whole new generation of skill sets for drivers going forward. And that's when a sport really is evolving because it's just the way Tiger's impact on golf changed what it meant to be a golfer and made the whole sport better. And so that's just very exciting. But talk a little bit more. I know we don't have that much time left. You talked about the activations and engagements around the sport because the other thing I learned as a fan, as a new fan, is that the family and social culture around the sport is actually in many ways what carries the sport. So it's whether you guys haven't seen a NASCAR experience until you see all these tricked out campers because families are coming in a week in advance to be ready to
Yep.
basically live NASCAR for a week or so. But I mean, you talked about Bubba Wallace's block party, which they're bringing back this year. Um, there's a whole there's a fun around NASCAR that again it's hard to. I don't imagine it's duplicated. I'm a football fan. I've been to pro basketball games. I'm trying not to diss other pro sports. The bottom line, you can have fun at a NASCAR race, watch the race, but be doing a whole bunch of other things with your friends and family to make it just a more immersive. That's what I'll say, an immersive experience, and not have to have a private box
In
to
order
do
to do
that. The average
it.
fan can just enjoy it almost at the same level, some with the private box and up in the top of the raceway.
Yeah, and we have both, right? And I think that's the cool part about it. Because if you want to do the exclusive box section, particularly at Chicago and certainly some other places across the circuit, you have that opportunity, and the experience will deliver. But I think again, when we talk about just really what NASCAR is at its core, and you mentioned the accessibility in terms of it to the drivers and the infield and being able to be up next to the cars, that really is the sport. It's about being accessible and having people to be able to touch it. And so I think, yes, events like Bubba's Block Party, and I think the nuance, and again, what excites us about being able to bring Lupe Fiasco to Chicago, or Big Crit and Manny Fresh to Birmingham, or Wale to Richmond, or Backyard Band to Richmond, right, is the understanding that we got to bring people in and have them be able to experience the sport in a way that they didn't think that they would be able to, but in a way that feels familiar to them. Again, I could talk about all the sort of little nuggets, over time, but folks in sort of the DC, the DC area up and down, sort of that mid Atlantic coast, excuse me, will know about the beat feet dance, right? And so being able to see a woman absolutely lose her mind, I mean that in the most respectful way, doing that dance at a block party, or seeing a young woman be able to to come on and dance authentically to Lil Uzi Vert, right, at an event in Richmond as well, is just, man, it's priceless to me, right? And so just understanding that we're creating these spaces for people to be able to show up and experience NASCAR in an authentic way, again, it's really exciting and fulfilling, but sets us up. And I will give this bit of a preview. I can't share who the talent is for this year's Bubba's Block Party, but I can say that it is a local artist, local to Chicago, who, as we talk about things and people who have revolutionized, the sport. Certainly someone who revolutionized, I would say, rap, right, and hip hop with the way that they deliver rap lyrics. So excited about that. A lot to come that's going to be on Friday leading into the event. So July 5th. So we're excited to have everybody out there to be able to come participate in that.
And the last thing I want to say is, and I want to make sure everybody knows where they should go if they want to try to go to the race, because there's still time to be in the space and to be in the place. But there was something I got to speak to Pitbull last year as well at one of the press conferences, and he was really insightful. And one of the things that he said about obviously his appeal to the Miami community, again, who's always been, like he said, the Latino community has always loved car culture. This is not like a big leap of faith for them.
Sure.
But the other thing that was done very well, but I know was not easy to navigate, but I experienced it in Chicago and other raceways, is that the traditional fan base and the quote unquote new fan base, the diverse fan base, are one fan base. Like there wasn't this feeling like, oh, the hip hop guy is on, I don't need to pay attention. Now, part of that is obviously NASCAR's younger generation, their generation has turned over, and they're obviously the young NASCAR fans, whether they're from Nashville or Miami or New York, is they're more open to obviously more diverse cultures, different types of music, et cetera, et cetera. So that helps. You wrote kind of a demographic changeover anyway. But I didn't feel like when I was in Chicago, for example, oh, there's these kind of black NASCAR fans over here enjoying this in one way, and then there's everybody, the traditional. No, it was like, nah, we all are enjoying this together because this is what we have in common. And that wasn't just in the track; that was all the different activations walking around the park, and you guys had activations all over there. And that to me was the biggest accomplishment. That it's still one NASCAR fan base that's more diverse, but it's not like these subsegments of old quote unquote old school NASCAR fans and new NASCAR fans.
100%, and I think that is one of the cool things. So, like I mentioned, I was at Danny's Amigos earlier, and just yes, it was an event obviously geared towards Latin American Hispanic fans, but there was not just Latin American Hispanic fans. There were white fans, there were black fans, right? Because again, the cool thing about NASCAR is you don't have to sure, like it's great to have representation of a Mexican American driver, of a black driver, of an Asian American driver, but all three of those drivers, whether Kyle Larson or Daniel Suarez or Bubba Wallace, all have fans that fall in different demographic buckets, right? And yes, as we look at, we know and understand that statistically speaking, right, like we've got all types of research, and this has also not been by happenstance. It's something that we've worked on over the last, call it handful of years or so. Is to get younger and more diverse, right? And so understanding that, yes, by being younger, period, diversity comes with that. And so you almost can't, moving forward in this world, and we're probably already at the beginning stages of this now. There is no such thing almost as multicultural marketing anymore. Either your marketing's multicultural because that's the consumer base, or it's not. So I think as we get a bit more seasoned and hit our stride in that, again, events like Chicago really give us a chance to blow that out. But we've talked a lot about Chicago, but I can think of things at Charlotte where Winston-Salem State has done to support Rajah Caruth. I can think about things that we've done in LA as part of the Clash. I can think, just it sort of goes on and on and on. These sort of, Atlanta and having Alvin Kamara come, obviously being that's his hometown, to be able to host a speed season event in the AUC. All of these things sort of coming together. And yes, they're the big ones and sort of some of the tentpole ones, but they're things that we're also doing on an everyday basis to really, again, just bring folks together and create an environment in and around the NASCAR race where if you like fast cars and you like sports, because that's really what it's about. It is a contact sport and folks are up on the wheel. And certainly these cars, put ourselves in a position to be able to race really well. It's the place for you, regardless of, what other demographic boxes or whatever that you check. If you like fast, cool, good looking cars, like you mentioned, there's a place for you at NASCAR, regardless of where that is.
And of course, if you again, we don't have time. I'm going to have you back on the show. Put it that way.
Perfect.
We can talk all about careers, and you work a lot with NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, and the Latino counterpart of that organization. This is a great sport to get into for different types of careers, and I think that's one of the biggest turning points of your Drive for Diversity program, recognizing you can be really deep into NASCAR without ever getting behind the wheel of a car, because it's a special athlete that can drive the cars that fast under those conditions. But it's a really accessible sport for all kinds of things, for students with all kinds of interests, both in the high school level, college level, and beyond. And you're living proof of that as an intern who built a career in this space. So listen, there's still time, everybody. I don't know if you need to tell them something special, but you need to be at the Chicago Street Race, especially if you've never been to a NASCAR event, and you can get to Chicago, or you're in Chicago. Is there anything special my audience needs to know to take advantage of that opportunity?
ChicagoStreetRace.com. Go check it out. Like you said, tickets certainly still available. And again, a great backdrop, a destination city. We're looking forward to having you. And quickly on to the point of sort of the careers, and I've mentioned a couple times about the cars and competition. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that yes, I started from an intern and have kind of come to this, but I've been able and fortunate and blessed enough to be able to kind of bounce around, and that's something that I think, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I think being able to work on the competition and the operation side of the business, being able to work for a track, during my internship period, and a team, at some other times in a couple of different departments that were servicing, some of the competition and operation things as well, have really helped to give a well-rounded sort of view of the sport. But I would say that that's really one of the things that's unique to NASCAR, is that if you got good ideas and you're willing to work hard and kind of get in, right, for people who are looking to start a career potentially or make a career swap, there's being a fan of the sport, being aware of the sport is really not a prerequisite. and there's a lot of opportunity to sort of move around in different places. And so it's been cool to have that, because it certainly all ties back, to that core product being on the racetrack, but being able to tie all of the things in that encompass NASCAR, literally out to the grandstands, and how people are experiencing that and showing up, whether digitally or whatever is really important. So appreciate the time, Alfred. This has been great, and look forward to get me back on. If I'm asking to be back on, I don't know if you've ever had anyone to do that before.
I never have, but we're gonna make it happen for real. I'm also be trying to get Phil Horton on, and I'll just say this to the audience before we let you go. You think of driving at high speeds as an individual sport, and yeah, the driver is the quarterback, if you will, that everybody focuses on. But you don't understand what a team sport it is until you understand the whole recruitment and training of pit crews. And you guys have done such amazing work in terms of recognizing that, at least all the ones I met were former athletes, Division I athletes, other sports, pro athletes in some cases, in other sports,
Yep.
who transitioned to the pit crew. And so I'm a NASCAR, I'm crazy about it now, so I could talk forever. But I just think some of the innovations around what does it mean to diversify a sport beyond the most visible performer in that sport was a big key to what you guys have been able to do, both on the track and in the executive ranks and the management ranks and everything that makes a great business, not just a great sport, go. But listen, man, I appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to seeing you in Chicago when I get there, because I'm coming out. And, just thank you for being my guest on Beyond the Hype.
Thank you for having me, Alfred. Looking forward to the next time.
Well, another great edition of Beyond the Hype. Yep, it's another NASCAR guest. It won't be the last time. I'm officially sucked into the NASCAR lifestyle, but you won't regret it if you join me there. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP, Executive Editor of Black Enterprise. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.